person in the flight. Dave Scott will be the pilot. This is going to be significant in the history of spaceflight. This is where we passed the Russians. Every place up to that point in history, things that have been done had always been done first by the Russians, but they had never figured out the very complex mathematics associated with performing a rendezvous in space. And that's what Gemini 8 was going to be, not just a rendezvous, but a rendezvous and docking. We put in orbit a large device called an Agena upper stage. We launched the Gemini module on top of a Titan launch vehicle. It separates, proceeds through the sequence of maneuvers that allow it to approach rendezvous and dock with a Titan. It happens perfectly. So we've got this big Agena upper stage, like the size of a school bus, little Gemini module attached to the side of it. And while the cheers are going on in the control center, this thing begins to tumble. Not supposed to happen. And they think the problem might be with the Agena. They've worked some things, but finally they have to back the Gemini away from the Agena, at which point the Gemini module, we discover the source of the tumble is in the Gemini itself. There's a stuck throttle, and the spin rate is accelerating. So whereas it was just tumbling slowly before, now we're in a full spin. We've got up to about 1 revolution per second. If you're in that situation, you blacked out, you black out in space, you're not going to come back. Armstrong, before this happens, has the presence of mind to engage an attitude control system that was only to be used during entry. He uses the jets in that system to counterbalance the force of the stuck throttle in the main attitude system, and somehow, after about 25 minutes, gains control of the vehicle. And saves enough propellant to navigate entry. They have to splash down immediately. They land in the North Pacific, about 500 miles to the east of the island of Okinawa. Recovery aircraft come out from the American Air Base at Guam, picking them up out of the water about 2 hours later. That's Gemini 8, fascinating flight to go read about and study. One other Armstrong incident, just to illustrate, again, who he was as a pilot and a person. About a year before the Apollo 11 flight, Armstrong is up at Ellington Air Force Base, Ellington Field now. It's about 5 miles north of here. We built up there a lunar surface, the only Air Force base in the country with a lunar surface. And we had built a module that looked like a lunar, well, I shouldn't say it looked like, but it was analogous to a lunar module. Astronaut at the top, in a cage with a hand controller on top of a big engine that lifts him up off the ground, legs out at the extremities that have jets at the bottom, so that you thrust up, the main engine cuts off, you fall, but the jets hold you aloft and you simulate a lunar landing. That's what Armstrong is doing. So this thing goes up, main engine cuts out, this thing begins to tilt. Not supposed to happen. So a pilot in this situation has one of two choices. You work the hand controller to try to stabilize the vehicle heads up, or you eject. Right? That's it. No other choices. I guess other than just go down with the vehicle. That's not a very good choice. Now, here's a piece of advice to you in case you ever find yourself in this situation. The timing of the ejection is critical. If you wait until you've gone through 180 degrees so that now your head is pointed at the ground, that's the bad time to eject. Armstrong ejects crossing the horizontal. Ejects sideways. And when they analyzed the situation later, they said he had about 1.5 seconds to spare. That's how close he cut it. Story doesn't end there. We pick up the story about 3 hours later. Over in Building 4, the astronauts have their offices over there. The astronaut across the hall from Armstrong gets a phone call. And the phone call goes like this. The guy on the other end says, "What happened to Armstrong?" I said, "What do you mean, what happened to Armstrong?" "Yeah, he almost killed himself out there, I hear. The LLTV got wrecked." LLTV, of course, is nothing to hold it up. It just spins, crashes into the ground, full propellant mode, big explosion. And you see the film of it. Back in the back is Armstrong descending in the parachute. The guy says, "Buddy, I don't know what to tell you. Armstrong's across the hall eating lunch." No. Walks across the hall. "Hey, Neil, you wouldn't believe what this guy said. He said you almost killed yourself out there at Ellington today." Armstrong says, "That's right. I'm filling out the accident report." That's the guy you want for your pilot. You're not going to panic at anything. He's going to know exactly when to pull the switch, save his life, not ruffled. Pretty incredible character. Continue.